Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're joined by the wonderful Becca Tobin to talk all about her latest TV series, Turner and Hooch. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about is because your character comes in a couple of episodes into the show, and usually going from the pilot in the beginning is so much about finding the voice and finding the tone of the show. But because you were jumping in a couple of episodes in, was that kind of a really huge benefit because a lot of those details had been figured out? And if so, how were you looking at what they had already been shaping in terms of the show's voice and, particularly with the genre and the fact that it is going for a young audience, but is also adult friendly fare as well?
To answer your question, if it had not been for my audition process and my chemistry test with Josh Peck and the team, I would not have known the tone of the show because I was entering episode 3. They weren't even finished really finessing or editing the first 2 episodes. So no one had seen anything. I was basing it kind of off of what they were asking for in the audition process and just like crossing my fingers if that was still the direction. But yeah, it's pretty crazy when you come into a show that is relatively new but hasn't aired yet. And you're just hoping your tone is what everybody else is looking for. And thank God they had the best directors on this show. Every single one of them, guided you if you were kind of going off in the wrong direction. And also those actors that I'm with, Josh Peck is, he's a consummate professional, and Cara Patterson is incredible. And her comedic timing is just, you'll see throughout the series. Like, I'm so impressed by her and her ability to bring so much levity to the show. So having them in my first scene, I think that was my first day. I was with 2 pros and I was just letting them sort of guide me.
Yeah. And with that audition process and the chemistry read that you had with Josh being something that gave you so much information and detail, what were some of the key pieces of information or details from that experience that you found yourself really honing in on when it came to shaping your character in the show?
So Josh has this incredible quality to him where he's a little Tom Hanks, and I think that's probably why they cast him. He's so humble, but he's so charming and so lovable, but he's so unaware of his I guess the effects he has on women. And so he had these funny quirks, and he had a little bit of an offbeat sense of humor. So it wasn't just cheesy kid stuff. And I think that was such a relief to see that he brought all of these interesting layers and really makes that character a human. So I felt comfortable to bring in my own little nuanced things and not be too worried that I wasn't like what you imagine you're doing for a family show, which is a little cartoony. But because he had so much finesse with that character, it made it so easy to bring in my own.
Yeah. And when you were shooting that very first scene where they're seeing each other for the first time as exes who've been apart for about 5 years, what were you thinking in terms of figuring out all of the different layers and what emotional beat you wanted to come in at? Because there's a lot of different ways that you could play a moment like that.
It's so true. And I remember so many times in my 20s of having that moment. And so it was an easy thing to call back on. I'd be walking down the streets of New York and bump into an ex in Hell's Kitchen. And it's like, do you want to seem like you're too cool for them and you're uninterested, but you're just being polite? Do you want to give off the vibes and hopefully they pick it up? Or so there were a lot of different ways to play that. I mean, my character is a professional. She's United Assistant U.S. Attorney. So, she has a very good poker face. And but I also wanted to show that there's a little history there and there's a little bit of a butterfly situation. So and then we're also dealing with those elements and the dog. That was my very first day shooting with an animal. And it's this giant, French Mastiff, and it's pouring down rain in Vancouver, and we're trying to pretend it's not raining. So all the technical factors were more challenging to juggle than how I was going to play the scene, really, to be honest.
And with the fact that that is her profession, I know that you have family members who are lawyers and work in the legal system. Did that mitigate some of the spaces where normally you would have been doing heavy research and fill in some of the gaps and shape some character elements for you?
For sure. I feel like my whole life was a preparation to play an attorney. I would go to work a lot with my dad and watch him. He was a judge for a while, and then he still does mediation. And my mother is somebody who my entire life was working as an attorney pretty much full time, and my sister. So what's funny is I have trouble believing myself when I'm watching this show that I could possibly be this like professional, career woman who is very intelligent and assertive in the courtroom. But every time I started to sort of not believe myself, it's like, well, I come from a woman. My mother is this like petite woman who doesn't command a ton of attention right away. But then when I would watch her in action, it's kind of like acting. It's a performance in a way. So every time I would sort of doubt my abilities, which is crazy that I even would after having so many years of studying these people, that's what I would tap into. It's just like, if my mom can do this and did it her whole life and still doing it, I can certainly do this scene, and pull it off.
As a lawyer as well, through the fact that we get details of her history with Turner and the fact that part of the breakup was her taking a job and moving for that job, we know instantaneously that she's very goal oriented and very ambitious for herself, and yet completely unapologetic for it, and also a really warm person. It's not that kind of, well, she wants a career, so she must be a really cold person. She's got this warmth as well. And was it really important to you to play to both of those sides of her?
Well, that's what's so interesting is that, and I'm glad that you picked that up. My mother's a very warm person. She's very, nurturing and friendly. And I don't think people would meet her and be like, oh, she must be some crazy career woman who wears a suit every day, but she is. And I think we're so layered and we're so multifaceted that I'm happy that I have her to kind of break out of that box of what we think this character kind of looks like when we're just reading it on paper.
And because we do get the opportunity to see her in trial as well, how did you set about determining what type of lawyer you wanted her to be, and how she was going to command that presence when she's in the room?
So when I started acting, and it's kind of calling back on something I just mentioned, is that my mom would sort of comment on it as a performance in the courtroom is similar to the performance that I would give in an audition, or because I'd be like, I am so nervous. I think I need beta blockers. I was doing live theater for a long time. I did Broadway, and I had times where I was just like a nervous wreck because it's a live audience and you're singing and you're dancing and you're acting. And I did a lot of understudying too. So I had to know a bunch of different roles. And I would say to my mom, like, I don't think you understand. And she's like, no, 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 I do understand. My whole life I'm on stage in the courtroom. And so, that was really helpful for me to always tap into, is like, this is, they're very much the same in ways. So when I was in the courtroom scenes, you do put on a mask as an attorney. You bring in someone confident and assertive and knowledgeable. And so, you're playing a role, because not everybody's like that every moment of their day, no matter how intelligent or accomplished that they are.
Yeah. And because you mentioned understudying in theater, I actually wanted to ask you something about that, because I think it's such an incredible skill to be understudying a part and to put yourself in a mindset in a place where you're ready to go on in that character, and yet you ultimately know that the majority of times you're going to just be ramping down from it and you're not actually going to deliver, but you have to be ready just in case. And so how did you navigate getting yourself into the space that you needed to be, both in order for the ramp up but also to kind of like step back from it all afterwards?
I cannot say enough that is the most challenging job I will ever have ever done. Because of that, you're kind of setting yourself up, like you said, at every moment to go on. I think at one point I was covering the lead of the show in New York, and then 4 other female roles in the show. And it was a very, very physical show. So girls would often get injured in the middle of the show. So you had to be ready to take on whatever that role was and jump right in. So I was a nervous wreck. Like, I never, ever managed. I had just, my adrenaline was always here, and I would sit in the wings or sit backstage and just sort of be going over choreography and going over blocking. And I would just find that in that situation, there's no winging it. Nobody can go in there and just wing it, because every single other person is, dancing around you or acting against you or harmonizing with you. So the preparation was just insane, and the notebooks that I had that I was studying. And then, yeah, 99% of the time the show would end and I didn't go on. So, it's a little nutty. But then when I had the times where I knew that somebody was going on vacation or somebody was not feeling great, that was a little bit more of a less manic preparation. I knew exactly what role I was going on. I could kind of stand in the wings and mark through the choreography, watching, the person who does the role permanently, and feel like that was a more natural approach to the work.
Yeah. I also love that you've made comparisons to the essence of live theater to working on the show because, when you are working with animals, they're trained, but there's a lot of unpredictable moments that come from that. And so even though a scene's been blocked out a certain way, if an animal does something different, with this instance with the dogs, that changes the beat of a scene, that changes where your character is going, it changes where you're looking, it changes how you're interacting with another character. So I wanted to also ask you about the way in which that kind of like called on a lot of skills that you developed in theater.
It was hand in hand, like the same techniques and the same things that you kind of keep in the toolbox as an actor. Is just, you prepare for a scene, but there's going to be a dog there, there's going to be trainers all around, waving things around and whispering commands, and that the priority of the scene is actually what the dog is doing. So you prepare as much as possible, but yeah, you get on set and it is very much like live theater. Sometimes somebody's shoe falls off and you have to figure out a way to pick it up without completely breaking the scene. Or, there were so many moments where we would block out a scene with the director, and then we'd come to set and the dog would have a completely different idea of what it wanted to do, how it wanted to respond to certain things. So it was kind of cool to have that, to have to be on your toes like that. Cause normally, things are pretty set in stone and people get very set in their ways and how they're going to deliver stuff or the physicality of what they're going to do, but not necessarily in this case.
And with the episodes that we've seen so far, obviously a lot of your character is rooted in her history with Scott, with their relationship and their chemistry together. And so with that in mind, how did that inform the character development that you were able to really work on and finesse by yourself, and then what you really needed to work out once you and Josh were in the room together?
I was able to do so much leading up to it. It's fun to get the parameters of your character and sort of know that there's a history and when it kind of began approximately, but being able to fill in the gaps, like with my acting coach, was so much fun. I thought of, you think of the things like, what songs were we listening to at the time we were dating? Like, what songs always remind me of him? Stuff like that. That's just such a huge part of it, because the nostalgia of an old couple, and certainly somebody that's like a first love, is really specific. Like, it's so specific. And I think we've all experienced it. So I was able to do a lot on my own. And then when I got in the room with Josh, I actually was just talking on my podcast. We had Josh come on and sort of talk about the experience, and it was really fun. And the other hosts of the podcast, the Lady Gang that I'm on, they were joking around saying how at one point I was explaining my process when I have to like be in love with somebody, as I actually just look at the person I'm acting with, and study them and figure out the things that I genuinely love about that person. I don't have to be in love with Josh Peck, but I have to find those things that, I think are charming or adorable. And I fall in love with those traits in the process, because I have to do that. So they're joking around and they're like, it's just so cute. Like, you kind of fall in love with the person, but it really is so much of that. Like, I could do all the preparation and think about the music we listened to and what we used to do, and did we smoke weed for the first time together and all that stuff. But then we come into the room and it's like, oh, he does this like really cute thing with his mouth when he's embarrassed. And so you're creating it in the moment as well.
And because you mentioned working with your acting coach on some of the scripts for that, is that something that you do on every single project? And if so, what does that collaboration look like in terms of really figuring out a lot of character dynamics?
So I won't work with my coach on the entire thing, unless it's something super challenging or really out of my box of what I'm comfortable being in. But I really like to work with her, to create these characters, to really make these people human, because she'll prompt questions that I wouldn't think about on my own. And I think you're never done learning as an artist, and I'm never in a situation with her where, I've been coaching with her since I was 18 years old. She's a big like theater Broadway. Her name is Joan Rosenfels, and she is just like a magic fairy godmother. But I have never had a session with her since I was 18 where I walked away thinking I could have gone without that session. I think I could have arrived at this place with this character or this scene without that hour with her. So it's always beneficial, but she gets me to a place where I can kind of bring that, weave it through the whole series. And unless I'm stumped, I can kind of be a big girl and do it without her, even though I don't love to.
And working on the show, it sounds like everybody had the opportunity to have the scripts for a little bit before shooting episodes, which, I don't need to tell you, in television is such a rarity and such a gift. And how did that change the way that you were able to work on a lot of scenes in advance and really think about things with your overall process?
It was amazing because like you said, it does not happen a lot in TV, and certainly not in TV that's sort of been going for many seasons. It's very much a spontaneous process. So this was amazing because I knew exactly how this season would end. I knew exactly what I would be doing, where I would be, what I had been going, what I'd kind of gone through to get to that place. So I was able to, in this, halfway through this series, and my relationships kind of set up for the audience so that they didn't feel like they were completely caught off guard, or that it came out of nowhere, or it all was able to like weave that in, and a little bit of foreshadowing with choices that I made with the character.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the microaggressions that we see coming at her in the professional workplace, because episodes out so far, we've seen a judge make a passing comment calling her Taylor Swift copy, and she kind of brushes it off, and it feels like she does that out of necessity because of the hierarchy between the two of them. But then we also see, I think in that same episode, a moment with where there's another lawyer on the case who makes a comment, and she stops to call him out on it and shut it down instantaneously. And so I wanted to ask about those aspects and how you really wanted to shape those moments in the show.
The second time that happened where I called out the other attorney, that was actually one of the female writers was on set that day, and she had me added in. And I think it's because she felt the exact same way watching kind of the first couple of scenes and seeing how this is this happens all the time in every profession. But I was so excited when she came up to me at the blocking rehearsal, and she was like, "Hey, let's add in this little aside where she kind of is like, I forget what the line was, but yeah, where she confronts it." And it was such a smart choice because it was a way to show how women can and should speak up in those moments. But yeah, I mean, it was cool. It wasn't written in, which is nice.
Yeah. How much opportunity was there in general to really play around with scenes, even if it is while you're blocking, before you went into shooting them? And what are some of the moments that really came out of that time?
It was so amazing because we had because it was COVID, we were restricted to having everybody on set and everybody up in Canada while we were shooting. But it was nice because we always would have at least one writer. Matt Nix came up many times, and we had producers that just never left. And so that was really, really wonderful to put a scene on its feet, block it with the director, and then have somebody on set like Matt Nix to say, "Hey, this doesn't feel right," or could we add this fun thing in? Like, everybody was so game. And I remember getting an email from Matt Nix when I joined saying, this is a set where I want everybody to be communicative and be open, and please don't hold back. Like, there are no egos here. And you hear that a lot in this business. And then you realize that it's a lot of lip service, and there are a lot of egos and people who can't take feedback. But I have to say, every single person on this set and in the creative team was so open, and they really meant it. Like, even if you were like struggling with something during rehearsal, oftentimes somebody would come up, like Mike Horowitz would come up to me and be like, "Hey, does this feel better to say it this way?" And it's like, oh, wow, it's so crazy collaborative. And you don't always get that.
And then because you were bringing up your podcast, Lady Gang, earlier, I was interested in the aspect of that in the way that you all always think about the malleability and the different forms that you can bring and how you can find different creative outlets with it and different ways to connect with your audience. Because, you know, whether it's a live event or whether it's a book, you've all really worked to continue evolving what that is as a concept, you know, having started as a podcast, but then thinking about the constant connectivity with your audience.
Yes, it's been one of the most beautiful lessons on not necessarily making a roadmap and just sort of following a feeling. I had always heard this idea of don't write out your list of goals and make it concrete jobs. Don't say, I want to do a series for Disney Plus. Say, I want my next job to be filled with inspiration. And the feeling I want to have on set is creative and joyful and challenged. So it's like this weird, I know it sounds so woo-woo and so weird, but ever since that, I was told that with Lady Gang, because it wasn't my primary job, I was like, well, I'm just gonna follow feelings with this. I'm going to follow if I feel connected with this community of women, I'm going to keep walking through the door, and I'm going to see if there's a way to engage all this whole community and write a book and keep the brand and the voice of the book very similar to the voice of the podcast. And so we shaped this really amazing brand just simply by trying to stay with the worst overused word on the planet right now, but authentic, like really genuinely authentic.
And then lastly, I wanted to talk about the really great editorial piece that you wrote recently about moving from LA to Texas since the pandemic, because I think a lot of people have gone through that journey of reassessing what it is that they want from where they live. And a lot of people have left places like LA and New York to live somewhere where there's a little bit more space or a different type of community. And given how many shifts have happened in the industry and how it looks like, at least for the foreseeable future, that things like self-tape auditions are going to continue to be at least the first round of auditioning for a really, really long time, how a lot of that has really helped to make a move like that possible for you and your family.
I'm just so grateful that a lot of terrible things came out of this pandemic, but the silver lining of it was industry wise that we can do so much from anywhere. And I would have never, ever been gutsy enough to leave LA if this had not happened, if we hadn't been pushed and challenged to see what can be done remotely. You know, you always hear I remember when I first moved to LA, I heard stories about how Meryl Streep doesn't even live in LA. She lives in Connecticut, and Matthew McConaughey doesn't live in LA. He lives in Austin. And I'm like, God, it would be so amazing if for no other reason to get so incredibly famous and successful that you could choose to live anywhere outside of LA. But it was so foreign. And this kind of allowed everybody to do that, no matter where they're at in their career. And it's been exciting. It's a new chapter. I love change. I'm somebody who I get really bored, and stagnant stuff really is frustrating for me. So to go from LA to 6 months in Vancouver during the pandemic to being down here, like it all just kind of feels like nothing's really permanent, but this is where we are now, and we're happy.
Well, I'm so glad it's been such a positive move, and just want to thank you so much for taking time to talk about all of this with us today.
Thank you so much.